Hey everyone, I'm Professor Evans, and welcome to Humanities 1301, the history of horror. If you are watching this in the fall semester of 2023, I apologize for the late upload. I've been dealing with some major PC issues for literally months now, and I finally have everything fixed. It's all good to go now. Also, please excuse if it looks like I'm reading off of a script. I am, because ADA compliance rules state that I have to provide a script and transcript with every video I put up for educational purposes, so my more extemporaneous style and from the heart way of lecturing isn't going to fly here. The beauty part of Humanities 1301 is that professor basically gets to make any class whatever they want, and it's usually based off their most niche interest, which for me is horror. And horror is a weird and incredibly unique genre, and one that's usually looked down upon heavily. Or at the very least, it's not taken seriously by those that aren't into it. This is especially true, you'll notice, in movies in the 70s and the 80s, and it kind of persists all the way to this day. The 70s and the 80s is where you start seeing a shift from horror being geared towards and marketed at adults as serious drama pieces, and start being geared more towards young adults and teenagers and more of the campier slasher affair. You know, the blood, the guts, the sex are all ramped up to an incredible pace at that point. We go from dark and serious set pieces like Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, which won an Academy Award, to Halloween and Friday the 13th. A lot of artists don't even like some of their work to be called horror these days. Silence of the Lambs, which is a movie about a serial killer that skins women to make a suit out of them, and an FBI agent who gets help from another serial killer that is a cannibal and eats people, is a pretty horrific concept. However, many people don't want to call Silence of the Lambs a horror film, especially since it won several Academy Awards. Instead, they label it a thriller. But what's really the difference between horror and suspense and thriller when the meat of the movie is horrific stuff? And so a question that many of you that in this class might not like, horror. So I have a question for those of you who don't like horror. Do you like the film Jaws? If so, why? And is Jaws a horror film in your mind? Most people won't even consider Jaws to be a horror movie, but it's about a large, pretty much prehistoric monster that evolved to be the perfect killing machine, eating people, including children. That's horror. And in this modern movie age, we have a term now called elevated horror to differentiate more artistic and serious films like The Witch or Hereditary. But is there really such a thing as elevated horror, and is it actually different from the rest of the genre? Is there a real difference, do you believe, in the concept of elevated horror? And one of our first readings by horror icon and historian Joe Bob Briggs quite succinctly states, "Please, it's a horror film!" There should be no difference. But that's really up to the reader and the viewer. Personally, I don't believe in elevated horror. I think it's all just horror. But I have plenty of friends who are critics who say, no, elevated horror is a thing, it's different from regular horror, but fandoms are going to fandom. So what makes horror really difficult to talk about, and why a lot of people don't like it, is how subjective it really is. All of us find fear and are scared by drastically different things, and some of those things are supernatural, and some of those things are realistic and worldly. But if we turn on the news, we are surrounded by horror all the time. And this class is not just going to focus on horror movies and books, but also real-life horror, true crime, and things that we don't consider horror that are horrific, like the horrors of racism, any sort of ism, transphobia, homophobia, ageism, etc. Those things are completely horrific. The concept of getting old and dying and decaying, and is there a God? Is there an afterlife? That can be horrific. Mental illness, not being able to fully trust your own brain, that is horror. And we got some ongoing discussions like that I really want to, see drive this class through the entirety of the semester. So we're actually going to be in this class thinking outside the box, and even if you don't like horror now, I hope you might keep an open mind and bring a different perspective to the conversation and discussion about it. But regardless, I do hope that we have a fun time and a nice little spooky semester here. So, one of our early quiz discussions, and something I want you to ponder and think about this, is Jaws a horror movie? Why or why not? What is horror to you?